My name is Schyler Church. I am a California real estate broker as well as a member of the education department at Accredited Real Estate Schools. We offer the course requirements to be eligible to take the state exam in California, but also a bunch of options to help you prepare for that state test. One of the tools that we use is practice questions, and today's video is going to be 25 top practice questions, section 3. So our third set of 25 that we have posted. And it's going to be question and answer, and some of them are going to be directed or instructed by me, Schyler Church. Some will be instructed by my father, Bryan Church, who's also a broker as well as an instructor. And we also have one of these that's going to be a little bit podcast style, so you get both of us. So we hope you like it, and make sure to like, subscribe, and comment as well so we keep producing new content. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at Accredited. But let's get started. One, when personal property becomes immovable, it A, becomes a lien on the property, B, will cause an encroachment that cannot be remedied by the owner, C, becomes real property, D, all of the above are true and correct. As always, let's dissect the question, understand what they're asking before figuring out what the best answer is out of the options provided. So they're looking at personal property. Personal property usually, most of the time, is movable. That's one of the key differences between personal and real property. When it's movable, we normally classify it as personal property. When you cannot move it, so it's immovable, we classify it as real property. So personal property, for instance, could be your pen, your phone, anything that's usually movable, very trivial items in regards to the state exam. But for instance, let's say there are cabinets. Well, if the cabinets are on the truck being delivered to the home, those are movable. They're being moved into the home, so those are considered personal property. But once you drill it in and actually build it into the property, it becomes immovable, and at that point, it's a fixture and classified as real property. So right now, when we're looking at this, we should be thinking probably on the lines of real property. So looks to be the best answer of C, it becomes real property. But let's make sure A, B, and D are not correct. Well, we're not talking about liens on the property. A lien is an encumbrance based on money, so it's limiting title based on money. That's not what we're doing right here. This personal property, even though it becomes immovable, is not limiting title. So it's not going to be a lien, and it's also not going to be an encroachment. That's just a different type of encumbrance based on use, and that's not what happens here. So the best answer is C, becomes real property, because all of the above are not correct either. 2. Abel purchased a property from Baker, who took back a promissory note secured by a mortgage on the property. The property is encumbered by A, general lien, B, specific lien, C, involuntary lien, D, security agreements. Well, let's go through this question. So Abel is the buyer, and he's purchasing a property from Baker, the seller. And to purchase the property, Abel takes back a promissory note, which is the IOU, the evidence of the debt for the loan to purchase the property. But that promissory note really doesn't mean anything if it's not secured by a mortgage or a trust deed. Now, that trust deed or mortgage is the collateral for that debt. On the state exam, they use mortgage and trust deed interchangeably, but the biggest difference in California, do note, with mortgages and trust deeds is the foreclosure proceedings. Those are different in California, so most of the time in California, we use trust deeds, but sometimes if you see mortgage on the state exam, you can kind of interchange it with trust deed, except when it comes to the foreclosure proceedings, as well as the terms. So, mortgagor, mortgagee versus trust deed, where you have the beneficiary, the trustor, the trustee, etc. But on this particular question, you could kind of interchange it. So we know that the mortgage is the collateral for this promissory note. So now that we have this collateral, so this mortgage with the promissory note, how is the property encumbered? What is it encumbered with? Well, we know it's limiting title based on money. So it's going to be a lien. So it'll either be A, B, or C. Security agreement, we can discard from one of the options because the security agreement deals with the a loan, but for personal property, not real property. Real property, we use mortgages or trust deeds, whereas when it comes to personal property, you would use a security agreement. So that would be incorrect on this question. Now, what type of lien? So we know liens can be classified as general or specific, involuntary or voluntary. Well, so we would tell you for a trust deed, it is a voluntary lien. So it wouldn't be involuntary, so we can cross out C. So C and D are not correct. A trust deed or a mortgage is something you voluntarily, as a borrower, as a buyer, take on to purchase the property or refinance it, etc. You could use cash, but if you don't have cash, then yeah, you might be stuck using a loan, but this is one that you are voluntarily accepting to limit your title. So it would be voluntary. Now, is it general or specific? Now, remember, with trust deeds and mortgages, they go against, and the collateral is that specific property, not all the properties, like your income tax, for instance. It would be then considered a specific lien. So the collateral that this mortgage is that specific property. So it is a specific lien. So remember, mortgage is a specific lien, and it's also a voluntary lien. So it's a voluntary specific lien. And you can do that interchangeably with trust deed as well for this particular question. 3, a city implements its general plan through A, court action, B, legislative action, C, zoning, D, condemnation action. Well, whenever you're thinking and you hear general or master plan, you should automatically be thinking of zoning. Zoning goes with police power, and it goes with implementing the general plan. So yes, the general plan might say, hey, we want this amount of area of the city to be for industrial, this for residential, this for that. But to actually implement it, they use zoning for those particular parcels of property. They say it's zoned for residential. So maybe R3, R5, R1, whatever it could be zoned for, or industrial. So it could be M1, it could be for, however they zone it. But the general or master plan is implemented with zoning. And that also goes hand in hand with police power. 4, a selling agent is the exclusive agent of the buyer. Therefore, he or she cannot A, present an offer to the seller and the seller's agent with the buyer's permission. B, personally present the offer to the seller. C, reveal anything negative regarding the buyer to the seller. D, represent the seller because he or she is paying the fee. Well, what we're talking about here is the selling agent, so the exclusive agent of the buyer. What can that agent not do? So everything else will be they can do it, but there's one option that they absolutely cannot do under any condition. So let's go through this. A, present an offer to the seller and the seller's agent with the buyer's permission. Well, as an agent for the buyer, yeah, you're going to be presenting an offer to the seller and the seller's agent. That's really one of your biggest things, is to assist and facilitate with that process. So no, that would not be something that she cannot do. It is something that the selling agent could do. So A is incorrect. B, personally present the offer to the seller. Well, you as the exclusive agent to the buyer can present an offer to the seller and bypass the agent that the seller is using with the seller's permission. So that is something that, even though you are an exclusive agent of the buyer, you could do. So B would be incorrect. C, reveal anything negative regarding the buyer to the seller. That is something you cannot do. You have to, remember, you have a fiduciary duty to your client, which is the buyer in this case. So you cannot tell the seller something negative about your buyer. For instance, maybe your buyer is having issues getting a loan, or there are issues with their job, or issues with some other type of thing that would harm your buyer in the seller's eyes. So you do not want to do that because you have your fiduciary duty. If you breach your fiduciary duty, then that opens up a whole other issues. But what the question's asking, what can you not do? So as an exclusive agent to the buyer, you cannot reveal anything negative regarding the buyer to the seller. That looks to be the correct answer, but let's make sure about D. Represent the seller because he or she is paying the fee. So you can, even though you're the exclusive agent of the buyer at this point in time, you could become a dual agent and represent the seller. But you would need permission and from both parties, the buyer and the seller, and then you would become a dual agent. So the best answer is C, reveal anything negative regarding the buyer to the seller. 5, the essential elements of value in a property appraisal is A, utility, scarcity, accessibility, desirability. B, utility, scarcity, demand, desirability. Scarcity, demand, accessibility, transferability. D, utility, scarcity, demand, transferability. Well, when we're thinking of the elements of value when it comes from an appraisal perspective, what should you be thinking of? Well, the acronym DUST. And what does DUST stand for? Demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Those are the essential elements of value in property appraisal. So let's go through it. So A, utility, scarcity, accessibility, and desirability. Yeah, those are great for value, but those aren't the essential elements. So A is incorrect. B, utility, scarcity, demand, desirability. No, that would not be the essential elements. C, scarcity, demand, accessibility, transferability. No, accessibility. Of course, that's a great element of value, but it's not an essential element of value. Remember, we're looking for the best answer. So process of elimination at this point looks like D will be, but let's verify that it follows DUST. So we have utility, scarcity, demand, transferability. Yes, those 4 are the essential elements of value when it comes to an appraisal perspective, because we have to look at demand, utility, scarcity, transferability. Do people want it? Can it be used? What's the supply like? Is there a lot of supply? And can you actually sell it? So, or actually transfer it to someone else. So those are the essential elements. So the best answer is D, utility, scarcity, demand, transferability. Remember DUST. 1. A deed of trust is recorded in 2006. A mechanic's lien is recorded in 2020. Which has priority? A, the deed of trust has priority because it was recorded first. B, the mechanic's lien has priority because it is not required to be recorded to be valid. C, the deed of trust has priority as long as work was started and or materials were delivered after the deed of trust was recorded. D, the mechanic's lien always has priority over deeds of trust. As always, we like to go through the question, dissect it, understand what it's asking to kind of give us an idea of and formulate an answer before dissecting and going in depth over the answer options. This will guide us in the right direction. So the question is talking about priority of recording. And we have a deed of trust that's recorded in 2006. Mechanic's lien is recorded in 2020. Well, normally, as you should be thinking of the rule, first to record is first in right. However, there are 3 exceptions when it comes to mechanic's liens, taxes, and subordinated loans. So those 3 exceptions we need to take into account for the rule, first to record is first in right. So mechanic's lien is saying that this one is recorded in 2020. Well, the deed of trust is recorded in 2006. So normally we would think that the first to record of the deed of trust has priority, but mechanic's lien is an exception. Even though it was recorded in 2020, it could have priority over the deed of trust if work was started prior to the recording of the deed of trust or materials were delivered before the deed of trust. So knowing all of this, which one would be the best answer? Well, A, the deed of trust has priority because it was recorded first. So yes, this is a good answer that the deed of trust does have priority, but it's not just because it was recorded first, because we have to think of that for the rule, first to record is first in right with those 3 exceptions. So that's a good answer, but it's not really the true reasoning why that the deed of trust has priority. B, the mechanic's lien has priority because it is not required to be recorded to be valid. No, a mechanic's lien does need to be recorded to be valid. We do know that. C, the deed of trust has priority as long as work was started and or materials were delivered after the deed of trust was recorded. That's good. That's saying, hey, that the deed of trust does have priority. We do know that. That is true. But the reason why is because that the work was started or materials were delivered after the deed of trust was recorded. If it was done prior to the deed of trust being recorded, then the exception of the rule of that mechanic's lien that we've been talking about would have priority. The mechanic's lien always has priority over deeds of trust. No, mechanic's liens do have priority with those three exceptions that we were talking about, mechanic's liens, taxes, and subordinated loans, but it depends on when materials were delivered and or that work was started. So really important to know. Now I kind of want to go into this a little bit more here. So the correct answer is C. Now, why is this the correct answer? We've already talked about it quite a bit, but I want to go over a little bit more explanation so you have some information on it. So the rule is first to record is first in right, with three exceptions: mechanic's liens, taxes, and subordinated loans. So mechanic's lien takes priority when materials are delivered and or work is started on the property. So in this particular question, a deed of trust was recorded in 2006 and mechanic's lien was recorded in 2020. Since the deed of trust was recorded 5 years earlier, it would indicate that it was in position long before work was started on the property. A lot of times, mechanic's liens would happen within about a year because of permits and their expirations. So this was clearly a lot longer, the deed of trust between the mechanic's liens being recorded. So it indicates that work would have been started on the property way after the deed of trust was recorded, but we can't guarantee it. So based on the question of what it was saying, that it did say on there that the deed of trust would have priority over the recorded mechanic's lien, as long though as work was started and or materials delivered after recording of the deed of trust or recordation of the deed of trust. So important to know, keep this in mind, and I hope it was helpful. And let's dive into question number 2. 2, can an unlicensed person sell a property and collect a commission? A, yes, if he or she is acting as an attorney in fact. B, yes, as long as the commission is equal to the amount of money needed to cover expenses that were only sale related. C, yes, as long as the unlicensed person is enrolled in a real estate course. D, yes, as long as it is a commercial property. So let's dissect the question and also understand the answer options here. So the answer options are all saying yes. What explanation would be the only reason an unlicensed person could sell a property and collect a commission? Well, as you know, if you are aware of real estate agency and with the real estate license law of what an unlicensed person can do versus licensed, an unlicensed person is limited on pretty much anything when it comes to an agency relationship. You cannot represent someone and sell their property and collect a commission unless you're representing yourself as a principal. So, for instance, a FSBO, for sale by owner, you can sell a property on your own. Now, a thing here, though, is you could collect a commission, though, where it's kind of like you're selling it as a FSBO, but you're actually an attorney in fact for the seller. So let's say seller Abel is selling their home, and they have this person named Charlie. They have a trusted relationship, and so Abel gives an attorney in fact relationship to Charlie. So Charlie has power of attorney to Abel. It could be a limited power attorney, general power of attorney, depending on it. But let's say it's a limited one and Abel to sell this house and collect a commission for doing so on behalf of Abel. And that is something you can do because, remember, power of attorney, you have the ability to actually sign as that person and act on their behalf. Whereas as an agent, so us as a real estate agent, we do not have an attorney in fact relationship with our principals. We have an agency relationship that allows us to have a fiduciary relationship or an honest and fair dealing relationship with other third parties, but we cannot sign on behalf of our principal. That is something we are not able to do. We cannot make decisions for our principal. But an attorney-in-fact relationship is something that could be given to someone, and if so, they could sell a property and collect a commission. That is the only reason that an unlicensed person could do it. It doesn't matter if the commission is equal to the amount of the money needed to cover the expenses. If you do not have a real estate license and you do not have the power to actually sell the property yourself, you cannot sell the property and collect a commission. Very important to know that. And it doesn't matter if you're getting your real estate license and doing the coursework. You have to have an active real estate license. And as long as it is a commercial property, doesn't matter what type of property. In California, the only explanation or the only exception to this rule is an unlicensed person can sell a property and collect a commission if he or she is acting as an attorney in fact. So A is the correct answer. And really make sure, important to understand agency relationships versus the power of attorney in fact relationships that someone could have. Because us as a real estate licensee, we have an agency relationship with our principals, whereas you could have a power of attorney and an attorney in fact relationship if you're very well known to the person and they trust you and want to give you that power. But that is very, very rare. 3, which of the following is an open planning design with simplicity, horizontal lines, easy access outside, window panes, and new construction? A, colonial, B, ranch, C, Monterey, D, contemporary. Well, you might be asking, why are we talking about this? Well, this is something you actually need to know for the state exam. I think it's a relatively trivial question, but you do need to know about it because it is something within the 7 areas and on the outline that the state exam uses to pull their state exam questions. And this is one that you could easily see. So on this, we're talking about a type of design. So what style is simplistic, horizontal lines, very modern they're kind of getting at here, easy access outside, large windows, so lots of windows, and relatively new construction, so more modern. On that case, the correct answer out of all of these is contemporary. You kind of just need to know that when they're referring to this, it is contemporary. Colonial, ranch, Monterey, very distinct types of styles. And the one, though, for contemporary is more modern, simplistic, for very outside-driven, large windows, lights, newer homes. That is the kind of what the key terms you need to know for when it comes to contemporary style, when it comes to architecture and homes. So contemporary. 4, how long are restrictions valid? A, 10 years, B, 50 years, C, until the property is conveyed, D, perpetual. Well, you need to know what perpetual means. So perpetual means forever. So it's in perpetuity, and that just means it continues on. So restrictions, we're talking about type of restrictions that you might have. So like deed restrictions, how long are they valid? Well, when they're in the deed, they are valid forever. They don't expire unless they're amended or changed, for instance, and that has to be in writing, and everybody has to agree to that for it. So restrictions are good forever. And knowing that, the correct one would then be perpetual. Perpetual. Doesn't matter once for 10 years, 50 years, it continues on and it continues to the new buyers, other buyers. So even if the property is conveyed, it continues those restrictions to those new buyers or that new buyer. So perpetual. So again, the state exam is kind of like a reading comprehension exam as well. 5, accretion is A, the rapid tearing away of the land, B, constructive severance, C, the gradual buildup of alluvium along a riverbank, D, under the doctrine of appropriation. Well, let's first understand what accretion is. So accretion falls under accession. So remember, accession is a way of gaining land, and it's by actually gaining of land either through annexation or accretion. Annexation is by man-made, so physically joining maybe 2 parcels of property, or accretion, which is the gradual buildup of soil along a water bank, so like a riverbank. So that is accretion. Now, going through these answer options, let's see which one fits best. So accretion is not the rapid tearing away of the land. That is called avulsion. Constructive severance. Well, the word sever is in there, and sever means cut, for instance. So that would not be the case because you're not gaining land. You're actually usually changing the property from real property to personal property. The gradual buildup of alluvium along a riverbank. Yes, because I was talking about the gradual buildup of soil along a riverbank. And soil is, so alluvium is basically the soil, the dirt, those brown particles floating along the river that actually attaches to the riverbank and creates this gradual buildup of land. So that looks to be the correct answer. And then D, under the doctrine of appropriation, no. Appropriation, we know, deals with landowners that are wanting to gain access to use land or use water, even though it's not next to their parcel of property, but they're near a body of water. So then they would go for a doctrine of appropriation to obtain that right because they don't have riparian water rights. So the correct answer is C, the gradual buildup of alluvium along a riverbank. That is accretion. One, the joining of lots to achieve plottage is called A, contribution, B, unearned increment, C, assemblage, D, none of the above. Well, you should automatically be thinking of plottage, and what goes hand in hand with it? Assemblage. So what is this? So assemblage is the actual act of joining together parcels of property. When you get an increased value, though, because of that joining of the properties, that increased value is called a plottage increment, or just called plottage. So when you hear plottage, you should be thinking of assemblage. So the best answer is assemblage because that is the actual act of joining the lots together. And when it achieves plottage, this increased value, this increase in value of this plottage increment, then that is really good, of course, and that's what you really need to know about. So keep those in hand, assemblage and plottage. Now, contribution, that deals with the principle of contribution, deals with an appraisal approach, appraisal principle anyways, and then an unearned increment, that deals with an increase in value, but not from a cause that you have control over. So assemblage is you're actually doing the part of joining these parcels together and increasing the value by doing so. But let's say jobs have become more jobs have opened up in the marketplace in the area that this parcel of property is located at. Well, the increase in value is nothing that the owner has actually done, and that would be an unearned increment, whereas a plottage increment is an increase in value due to assemblage, the joining of lots. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. 2. What is the best way to acquire the complete bundle of rights to a property? A, life estate, B, fee simple, C, freehold, D, fee simple defeasible. Well, when we're looking at the bundle of rights, that complete bundle of rights, let's start off by looking at difference between freehold and leasehold, or less than freehold. Well, if you have freehold, you're going to have a lot more bundle of rights than you will if you have a leasehold interest or a less than freehold interest. And when we break down freehold, we'll be looking at fee simple and life estate. So fee simple is much better than life estate because remember, the life estate with your bundle of rights that you only have the property for either your life period or the life of someone else. Whereas fee simple, you would be either fee simple absolute or fee simple defeasible, which fee simple absolute gives you the complete bundle of rights. So that is the best answer. Fee simple defeasible gives you all the bundle of rights, but there is a condition on the property when you obtain it because title can be defeated. So the best is fee simple absolute. That is not an actual answer option. So the best answer would then be fee simple. Fee simple, even though that includes fee simple absolute and fee simple defeasible, the best one is fee simple, not fee simple defeasible, to give you the complete bundle of rights to a property. So it's all just working it out and kind of starting with the question, understanding what it is, what you know, and kind of working your way down to find the best answer, but also the best answer option provided. 3. What would a prelim title report not show? A, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. B, unrecorded liens, encumbrances. C, property taxes. D, judgments against the seller. Well, what is a preliminary title report? Remember, that is an offer from a title company. They do a title search from the title bank to get a detailed understanding and analysis of the title of a property that a buyer is purchasing. So they are offering title insurance, and they want to give an idea of what the current title on the property shows. What does a prelim usually show? Well, it shows recorded liens and encumbrances, shows the property taxes, and it shows the current owner. It'll show covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So that's just a little bit of it. There is a lot that it will show, but for this particular question, let's kind of dive into it and see what we already discussed. So covenants, conditions, and restrictions, that will show up on a prelim. It'll either show up because it's recorded with the title, or it is recorded, actually, it's in the actual deed itself. That's kind of a little bit older of a way of doing it, but the covenants, conditions, and restrictions will show up in the title. Unrecorded liens and encumbrances. Unrecorded, no, a prelim does not show it if it's unrecorded. If it's recorded, then it will show a recorded lien or encumbrance, but not unrecorded. So that looks to be the best answer at this moment. What about property taxes? Property taxes will show up. The county is really good at getting their money. So the prelim is going to show if the property taxes were paid or not. And if they were not paid, is it a lien against the property? And then judgments against the seller. Most judgments are general liens, and those are issued by the court. And so those would be a recorded lien that shows up on the prelim as well. And remember, a general lien goes against the person, so the seller, and that would be over the person's entire, all their properties when it's a general lien. So that would show up then on the prelim if it goes against the seller, which would be then against the property if it is a general one. And most judgments are. So the best answer would be unrecorded liens or encumbrances. Because remember, a lien is just a type of encumbrance that limits title but based on money. If it's unrecorded, it will not show up on the prelim. 4, the statute of frauds requires real estate contracts to be A, witnessed and acknowledged, B, written, C, recorded, D, all of the above are correct. Well, statute of frauds. When we think of that, we should be thinking of real estate contracts that need to be in writing, because all real estate contracts, except leases of a year or less, are required to be in writing due to the statute of frauds. Knowing that, the best answer would be written. Be written. It's of course great to have a contract be witnessed and acknowledged, but it's not needed due to the statute of frauds. It does not need to be recorded. So the best answer is B, written. Statute of frauds. Remember, all contracts, all real estate contracts must be in writing except leases of a year or less, or any type of contract that takes longer than a year to perform. So that is where you need to know for statute of frauds. Written is the correct or the best answer for this question. 5, when an escrow has reached perfection, A, all terms and conditions of the escrow have been met. B, escrow has been opened. C, contract is illusory. D, the escrow officer must file an interpleader action in court. Well, we're talking about escrow when it has reached perfection or it has been perfected. It's kind of self-explanatory, but it seems like it might be easy or it might be harder than you think it is. It's really just saying, when has escrow been completely satisfied? Everything has been perfected. Everything that where it was, what it should be has been met. So the things that needed to be done have been completed and have been done. So the best answer is that all terms and conditions of the escrow have been met. That is the correct answer. That is saying that escrow's job, what it was supposed to do to help facilitate the transaction and to meet these, to follow the escrow instructions and everything that needed to happen did indeed happen. So everything has been met. Now, doesn't mean that escrow's been opened. That just means escrow's been opened. But once it's opened and then it's been perfected, at that time, usually as escrow is closed. Contract is illusory. No. The escrow officer must file an interpleader action in court. No. That would be something's going wrong with escrow, and so it has not been perfected yet. The best answer is all terms and conditions of the escrow have been met. This seems like a very weird question, I do know, but it is something you do need to know for the state exam. Hint, hint. This is one you do need to know about. So you need to know about all of this, but this one is one that you might think is weird or frivolous, but you do need to know about it. Question number 1. When an adverse possessor has fulfilled the requirements of being open and notorious, uninterrupted for at least 5 years, has a claim of right, is hostile to the owner's intent, and has paid property taxes for 5 or more years, this is called adverse possession. When does the buyer get legal title? A, legal title to the property is transferred by court order. B, when the adverse possessor signs a quitclaim deed. C, when he purchased the property. D, never. So there's a lot to this, and you need to know the specifics about adverse possession, and my dad is going to talk a little bit about this right now.
Okay, let's talk about the adverse possession. Now, what happens is, let's say you have a parcel of land and your neighbor has a parcel of land right, adjacent next to you. And let's say that you have been using a few feet of your neighbor's land for quite a while. And it's open and notorious. Everyone knows you've been doing it. It's uninterrupted, continuous use for at least 5 years, it's been going on longer than that. There's a claim of right. There's a reason why you're using that, because you've been mowing that part of the lawn and you think that you actually own it. And matter of fact, the fence line is over so that it is on your neighbor's lot, and so looks like yours is a little bit wider than what it really is. It's hostile to the owner's intent. It's bad for your neighbor, but they're letting it happen. And you've even been paying property taxes for the last 5 years or more. And how you're doing that is the tax assessor has issued a map, and the map actually shows that strip of land that you've been using, you actually own it and you're paying taxes on it. So if that's the case, then you would actually own that property through adverse possession. But to actually get the title to it, you have to get legal title. Is transferred by court order is going to be the correct answer. So how that works is you would have to actually go to court and institute a quiet title action and ask the court to rule that it is your property. And then it would actually transfer to you as adverse possession. Sometimes the courts can actually rule without a full quiet title action if there's no one opposing it. And so that's how you end up with adverse possession. This is something that's peculiar to California. Does have this, and there are actually quite a few more of these types of adverse possession issues in California than you would actually believe that there would even exist. The adverse possession, sometimes what they'll do on the state exam, try to confuse you between quitclaim deed and quiet title action, and they're different. Quitclaim deed, what happens with that is that you would sign a quitclaim deed quitting your claim to an item, so that wouldn't have anything to do with this adverse possession.
As well as when they purchase the property, because
Right.
It's once you've owned the property, now you could become an adverse possessor, or your property could be adverse possessed.
Correct. So you got to keep an eye on your property. Make sure that you got your neighbors or other people are not using your property when you don't know about it.
Exactly. So question number 2. CPI would be seen in an A, commercial lease, B, residential home loans, C, real estate leases, D, private mortgage insurance. Well, first off, CPI, you have to know that means the Consumer Price Index. And so, Dad, which one would this you would think actually be seen in? A commercial lease, a real estate lease, residential home loans, or private mortgage insurance?
Well, what happens with the consumer price index, it typically is used to measure inflation. And the last dozen years or so, we have not had inflation. We've had been a lot of deflation, which is the other direction. So when, of course, it looks like there's going to be a lot more inflation coming down the road here. So the CPI will be much more important for leases. And commercial leases are the ones that actually use the CPI when there's inflation. And the reason is because they're sophisticated leases, and the owners of the properties, they understand the fact that these, as inflation kicks in, their actual rents that they're collecting are devaluing. And so they want to increase the rents up with inflation, so at least they stay even. They won't increase what they're making, but they won't lose any money. So these are real common CPI increases for commercial leases. And commercial leases, we're talking like shopping centers, office buildings, industrial properties. And so when there's no inflation, if there's deflation in there, then they'll usually not include these in the lease, because what they'll do is they'll do set rental increases, and those will be like maybe a certain cents, per square foot each year. When, say it's a 5-year lease, and each year you'd go up maybe 5 cents a square foot type thing. And that's what we've been seeing here in the last several years. But the residential home loans don't have anything to do with it. What they do is the adjustable rate loans there, they follow an index, usually the monthly treasuries average. They used to use the London Interbank offered rate, but they found out that one was a fraudulent one a few years ago. But those are an index that measures the cost of the money, so that would not have anything to do with it. Real estate leases in general, yeah, that would be, but the better answer is the commercial leases, because residential leases typically don't have a consumer price index.
They don't use graduated leases usually.
Right. Well, they
could if it's a commercial property.
They could, but they typically don't. Yeah.
Exactly.
Most of the time, real estate leases for residential property, whereas a commercial lease, like Schyler mentioned, might have a graduated lease, which will change each year. Hopefully go up if it's
exactly. So if commercial lease was an answer option, real estate leases would be probably the best answer option if commercial lease wasn't actually an option provided.
Well, the thing of it is, the commercial lease is the correct answer, and private mortgage insurance doesn't have anything to do with it. What that private mortgage insurance is used when you have a high loan to value type loan, and the lender is not comfortable making a loan over an 80% loan to value ratio. So what they'll do is they'll have the borrower pay for private mortgage insurance. So if there's a loss, the lender doesn't get hit with the entire amount. So that doesn't really have anything to do with our CPI for this particular question. So the correct answer is going to be a commercial lease on this one.
And then we have 3. When an investor invests funds to improve a commercial building, this will affect A, cost, B, value, C, price, D, original cost. Well, we have to look at what do we know about cost, value, price, and then the original cost, and how an improvement to a commercial building actually which one it'll affect. So which one do we think it would be?
Well, the thing of it is that when you do an improvement of a commercial building, you're talking, again, like shopping centers, retail, office buildings, those types of commercial leased investments is what they're talking about here. And when you're doing an improvement, you're looking at increasing the value of that property. Because when you improve it, you'll be able to get greater rents, at least you hope you can. And when you get the rents go up, then of course the value of the property is going to go up as well. It doesn't affect the cost of it. Price is a little bit different, because what happens with price is that there's a difference between value and price. Okay, the value is what the property actually will bring on the open market when you have a buyer who's not under any duress, seller who's not under any duress, and they come together and buy the property, and that's your value. The price can actually be more than the value if you have things like favorable financing and things where it makes it favorable for the buyer to come in and pay more money for the property because of the financing, but the value, of course, would still stay the same, which would be a lot less. For example, let's say you have a $100,000 property that's valued at $100,000, but the buyer is willing to pay $120,000 for that property. The reason is because there's favorable financing on it. So that would be the price. And so that would not be correct in this one. And then D, original cost, what you paid for it doesn't really matter that much here because you're wanting to increase the value by doing your improvement.
Yeah, but then you kind of look at it. What's the difference, you think, between cost and original cost? What are they getting at here between those two terms?
Well, the original cost is what you would pay for it, whereas cost would be how much it's costing you to actually improve the property. And what you're really, as an investor, you're looking at is the value because you're wanting to increase the value so that way when you sell the property, you can get more money for it.
So when an investor invests funds to improve a commercial building, this will affect value. Value is the correct answer. And let's move on to question number 4. What is the difference between riparian and littoral rights? A, riparian rights refer to lakes and oceans. B, littoral rights refer to lakes and oceans. C, both riparian and littoral rights fall under the doctrine of appropriation. C, water can never be appropriated by a riparian or littoral owner. Well, now we just have to, as always I say, we have to dissect the question. They're basically just asking, do you know what the difference is between riparian and littoral rights? Well, riparian rights, that deals with streams and...
Yeah, matter of fact, this looks like a very innocent little question, but it's actually has some very, very complicated answers here.
There's some nuances to it.
Some nuances. So let's go through these and we'll explain how it works. So riparian rights and littoral rights. Now, riparian water rights is that if your property is located along a river, stream, or water course that's moving, you could have riparian water rights to use that water as much as you can reasonably use. That's worth quite a bit of money. For example, let's say you're a cannery and you're along the river and you have riparian water rights, you can bring the water out of the river. That's a big deal. And it's worth quite a bit of money. Or if you're just a homeowner and you have that, and you can use your water out of there for your own use. That's also has value as well. And so that's riparian rights are for river, stream, or water course. Now, a littoral right, that would be the same thing, but for lakes and oceans. So it wouldn't be moving water per se. It would be something where you are along a lake and you can use the water as much as you can reasonably use. So that's going to be your littoral rights. And so what happens is that if you look at the A answer, riparian rights refer to lakes, that's wrong because that's littoral. B, littoral rights refer to lakes and oceans, and that's actually your correct answer on this one. But look at C and D answers. These can be actually quite tricky. C, both riparian and littoral rights fall under the doctrine of appropriation. Now, here's a really, they try to trick you on this here, but we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, the doctrine of appropriation means that, let's say that you have a property in the San Joaquin Valley and you need some water. And so what happens is that you are allocated a certain amount of water by the local water company, and it could be a mutual water company where everybody owns but you're actually allocated, they own that water company, but you're allocated that water. And that's through the doctrine of appropriation. They actually have appropriation of the water is given to you. So you don't have to be near a water, a river, stream, or water course or a lake or anything. You would just be out in the middle of the valley and you would get water that would be brought in through a canal or a pipe type situation, and you would have that through the doctrine of appropriation. Okay, so the thing of it is doctrine of appropriation is exactly opposite of riparian and littoral rights. So those would not be correct. Then you have water can never be appropriated by a riparian or littoral owner. Now that sounds like the same thing, but it's not. Now appropriated meaning that it says water can never be appropriated. When you're a riparian or a littoral owner, that water that you have that's running alongside your property, like through riparian, or if it's a lake, let's say, next to it, then you're actually appropriating that water. Now, it's confusing because you have the doctrine of appropriation, which is different than you appropriating water. Okay, this is a tricky part of it, so be real careful here. So water can never be appropriated by riparian? No, that's not right, because they can, and it's appropriated because they legally can use as much as they can reasonably use. However, if you are somebody out in the middle of the valley and you do not have a river or stream water course or lake near your property, then you could have that water could be pumped into your property through the doctrine of appropriation. So be very careful with that. And of course, in this case, the one correct answer is going to be B. Littoral rights refer to lakes and oceans.
And I also actually want to throw in a test-taking tip to this question. So even with maybe not being completely understanding appropriation versus the doctrine of appropriation, they're asking here in the question the difference between riparian and littoral rights. Whereas C and D are kind of just saying that they both fall under this particular category of rather falling under the doctrine of appropriation or can never be appropriated. So that's not really saying the difference between the two. So even just not really knowing per se the doctrine of appropriation versus what you can appropriate when it comes to riparian and littoral rights, just understanding the actual what the question's asking will also help you figure out the best answer option. So just knowing, you would think, okay, A or B would be correct because those specify a difference between the two. Now it's knowing what littoral versus riparian is. Also, a little memory tool for you here is, I like to think of when it comes to riparian, it starts with an R, think of river, stream, or water course. Littoral starts with an L, think of lakes and oceans. That is a really great memory tool to help you keep them straight, because this is one that can be a little bit hard to keep up with and be able to set apart. So you have to know the information behind it, the concepts, but also it's being able to take the test and figure out what the question's asking and then what the best answer would be based on what the question's asking and the answer options provided. So it goes hand in hand, knowing the material, but also being able to take the exam. And that's why these practice questions are a great tool to make sure you're proficient in applying the material that you've been learning. And so this is a prime example of a simple question, it looks like, but it can be relatively difficult if you don't really know the specifics and the material behind it. So the best answer is B. Littoral rights refer to lakes and oceans, whereas riparian rights, those refer to streams, rivers, and water courses. So let's move on to question number 5. A corn crop needs to be cultivated every year. What is it called? A, emblement, B, agricultural addition, C, attachment, D, riparian. Well, we're talking about a corn crop that needs to be cultivated. What is the best term for this corn crop?
Well, the thing is with corn crop, it's going to be an emblement. So it's cultivated every year. It's called an emblement. And the emblements are a little bit interesting because what happens with an emblement, like a corn crop, is that you can actually, when you're selling that property and it has corn that's on the stalks, right, have been growing, you sell that property, those corn and the stalks are attached through a root system to the land, and they are considered real property. So they would transfer to the buyer of the property. However, if you wanted to sell that corn crop while it's on the stalks, still attached, you could do so, and that corn crop would be considered personal property. So that's a little bit of a different way of looking at things. And so emblements then are going to be cultivated every year, and you could actually sell that corn crop while it's on the stalks, and it's still attached, but it would be considered personal property.
And also, while you're talking about being attached, don't get being attached and attachment thinking that they're the same, because an attachment deals with a type of lien. It falls under an encumbrance, and that is something very different than what we're doing when we're saying it's attached to a root system, and that is something that deals with classifying real property versus personal property.
Exactly.
So
the implement then is going to be the corn crop, and that's what it's called. Now, the thing of it is that when that corn crop is sold while it's still on, it's called constructive severance. And so be real careful with that, because there's some questions on the exam that get into that. And then agricultural addition doesn't have anything to do with it. And by the way, if you see answers, if you've done a really good job of studying, and you see some of the answers you don't recognize, that's not going to be the right answer. Because what happens is that in these questions, you're going to have the right answer, and then they're going to have a lot of the wrong answers are actually right answers on other questions. But sometimes you'll have something that comes up that's not even in any of them.
Very out of the blue.
Out of the blue. And typically that's not going to be the correct answer on those, so you don't need to worry about it. Attachment, like Schyler said, that is what happens when you have, let's say that there is a judgment against you, and then what would happen is you would have this attachment which would freeze their assets, and then in anticipation of the judgment coming in, and then a lien being attached to the property. So that doesn't have anything to do with corn crops, but be careful with the term attachment, because they're totally different. And then D is riparian, which of course is a river, stream, or water course.
We just talked about.
Yeah, it runs along your property, and it's you can have some. And by the way, that riparian rights are actually real property as well, which is interesting.
Very much so. Okay, so the best answer is emblement. A corn crop needs to be cultivated every year. It is called an emblement. So that is the best answer for it. For question number 5. Question number 1. Determining the value of a single-family residence, the appraiser would primarily use the A, cost approach, B, comparison approach, C, income approach, D, land residual technique. So as always, I like to say, let's dissect the question, figure out what it's asking, and kind of formulate an answer without really even going through the answer options. So we're looking at determining the value of a single family residence. So there, single family residence is the key portion or the key element to this question of what an appraiser would primarily use. So what type of approach would an appraiser use when valuing a single family residence? Well, what 3 approaches are the main ones? We have the cost approach, the income approach, but then the most important one is the market data approach, which is also called the comparison approach. Now, what do we know about these 3 approaches? The cost approach, this is used for like special use buildings, like for instance, like an old firehouse, an old library, properties that are hard to value because they're not readily comparable to other properties. The income approach, that's used on income producing properties. So usually like multi-unit properties, commercial, etc., properties that derive income. And then we have the comparison approach, which is the market data approach. This is the most readily usable approach because you use sales comparables. And the sales comparables are a really great tool to help with making adjustments and figuring out what the market, where the market currently is at. And so single family homes usually use sales comparables by using the market data approach. That is the primary use for it. And so the appraiser would primarily use the market data approach, so which is called the comparison approach. So that is the best answer there going through it. It wouldn't be cost approach. That would be if it was like a special use building. Income approach, if it was an income producing property, then the appraiser would primarily use the income approach. And the land residual technique, that actually falls within the income approach and is something that is very, very special. It's misunderstood, and it's not something you need to know about for the real estate exam. It's very, very complex. And if you see that on any of your questions or anything like that, I will tell you it's going to be a wrong answer. What we only need to look at and know about are the 3 main approaches of the cost approach, income approach, and then the most important one, the market data approach, which is called the comparison approach. And we use sales comparables within that approach. And sales comparables are really, there's an abundance of them for single family homes. And that's why the market data approach is the best approach. And the appraiser would primarily use that approach when valuing a single family residence. So that's the correct answer. And let's move on to question number 2. If a buyer purchases a real property where he'll take title subject to the seller's existing loan on the property, and the sale is made without the knowledge or consent of the lender, it should be disclosed to both buyer and seller that A, the lender may accelerate the loan if he finds out about it. B, the sale may not be completed if the lender calls the loan due and the buyer cannot find other financing. C, the seller remains personally liable for the loan and any potential deficiencies. D, all of the above are correct. So the first thing we have to do is look at the question, figure out what they're asking and what they're wanting out of it. So a buyer purchases a real property where he will take title subject to the seller's existing loan on the property. Now you need to know here that subject to is a term. This is a term you need to know about because otherwise you might just be thinking of a regular loan assumption. But no, this is a subject to loan. And what do we know about subject to loans? Well, it's relatively complicated. There's a lot to it. And you honestly won't see them really in the real world. They don't happen as much. They really stopped about, and I would say about 87 was really when they stopped. But you need to know about them for the state exam because it's an illogical concept. And because of that, of course, the DRE is going to ask you questions on it. And that's why we're talking about it today. Now note, I'm going to be going at this at a very cursory level. There's a lot to know about subject to loans. It gets very complex, but we're just going to be talking about it on what you need to know about for the state exam to be able to help you answer these questions, okay? So very cursory level, what you really need to know about, but no, there's a lot more to it. So we're now talking about subject to, and it's a subject to loan because the sale is made without the knowledge or consent of the lender. Now, what needs to be disclosed to both the buyer and seller when a subject to loan is going to be happening? Well, let's look at the first answer option. The lender may accelerate the loan if he finds out about it. Definitely. So as you know, there is an acceleration clause, and within that acceleration clause, a loan becomes due and payable upon a happening of a certain event. A lot of the times, it's alienation due on sale when the property is conveyed. And on this case, if you are doing a subject to loan, a buyer is purchasing the property and going to be basically taking over the loan, but without the knowledge and consent of the lender. So it's happening subject to. If the lender finds out about this, the lender could accelerate the loan due and payable because this event did happen. Now, so that is something that the buyer and seller need to know about. What about the sale may not be completed if the lender calls the loan due and the buyer cannot find other financing? They're basically saying, hey, before the property actually even is sold and the subject to happens, the lender could find out about it and make the loan due. And so the buyer would then have to find other financing. And if they can't find other financing, then the sale will not be able to happen. Then the buyer could lose, any money that was been invested on inspections, for instance. So that's why it's important for the buyer to be aware of it that, hey, the lender could find out about it and this won't even happen. So the sale wouldn't even happen before a subject to loan actually occurs to be able to buy the property. So you need to know about that. That's definitely something that could happen. And now what about the seller remains personally liable for the loan and any potential deficiencies? Yes, because remember, the biggest thing that you need to know about subject to loans is that the seller remains personally liable for the loan and also any potential deficiencies that could happen. So for instance, if a default of payment happens, then the seller could remain personally liable for those deficiencies. So these are all correct about subject to loans. So the best answer is all of the above are correct. And this is because it's subject to. Now, when you're looking at this question, you may be thinking, hey, subject to the seller's existing loan, just thinking that it's something that, a loan assumption, not really knowing that subject to is a term. And you need to know about this term for state exam purposes. Now, you probably won't ever come across this once you're actually licensed because they really stopped happening because they are more prevalent with FHA loans until about 87 when the due on sale clause really became a thing. So really important to know about that. So all of the above are correct when it comes to the subject to loan. So let's move on. 3, the County Board of Supervisors sets the A, county property tax rate, B, assessed value of all properties located in a particular county in California, C, documentary transfer tax for California, D, appraised value of properties located in their county. Well, we're looking at a county level. So, and what the Board of Supervisors does, or a different entity that is comparable to the Board of Supervisors, what do they do? Well, the County Board of Supervisors, they set the property tax rate within their county. So knowing that, looking at this, the best answer looks to be A, the county property tax rate. But let's make sure the other ones are not correct. So the assessed value of all properties located in a particular county in California. The tax assessor within the county is the one that actually sets the assessed value of all the properties. Because remember, when the property is sold, the property is assessed ad valorem, which is according to value. A lot of times it's actually the sale price, but sometimes if the buyer got a screaming deal and it's not really at market value, then it could be assessed at a different number than what it actually sold for. But when it's sold, that is usually when the properties will be reassessed and reassessed according to value. And remember, because of Prop 13 right now that's still in effect, we're then limited at an increase every year in the assessed value. Right now it's limited to a 2% increase. And so that way, some people that have owned their properties for 30, 40 years might have extremely low tax assessments. And that is something that takes into consideration. So just need to know the tax assessor, they're the ones that actually set the assessed value. And then the documentary transfer tax for California is set at the state level by California. And so remember, that's the 55 cents per $500 of new money in the transaction that is needs to be paid. And then what about appraised value of properties located in the county? Nope, appraisers just set the appraised value of the property, and that has nothing to do with the actual tax, what is paid for taxes. Now, the appraised value could assist, though, when the amount that is approved for a loan and when the property is sold, so what it actually sold for, and then that could then come into consideration, reflect in the assessed value sometimes if the tax assessor believes that to be the market value or according to value ad valorem at that time. But the County Board of Supervisors, or whichever entity within that county that is comparable to the Board of Supervisors, sets the county property tax rate. So that is the correct answer. So they take the assessed value set by the county tax assessor, and then the property tax rate for that county set by the County Board of Supervisors. They multiply it, and that is the amount paid in the property taxes each year by that property. So a little bit that you need to know about taxes. And there's a lot more to know about it too, but this is just something that you need to know. From the County Board of Supervisors, they set the county property tax rate. That rate, and that is multiplied then by the assessed value that's set by the tax assessor within the county. 4, brownfields are A, formal commercial industrial site that is affected by environmental contamination, B, earthquake fault lines, C, non-riparian property owners, D, radon-infused soil. So, brownfields. You can kind of infer what it is just based off of the name. It's a field that is brown. Why is it brown? Well, it is a site that has been affected by environmental contamination. So a formal commercial or industrial site that has been contaminated. And that is the best answer for it. It does not deal with earthquake fault lines. It does not deal with non-riparian property owners, nor does it deal with radon-infused soil. Brown fields are fields that are brown because they have been contaminated. And so they've been a formal commercial industrial site that is affected by environmental contamination. That is the best answer. 5. Under an exclusive agency agreement, A, an owner must pay a commission to the broker no matter who sells the property. B, an owner can sell the property to anyone the day after the listing expires with no liability to the broker for commission. C, an owner may sell the property himself without liability for a commission to the broker. D, an owner can subsequently give another broker a listing at any time, which would have the effect of canceling the original listing agreement. So we're talking about an exclusive agency listing agreement. Now, this is one that you need to know about for all the different types of listing agreements that are out there. Remember, we have the exclusive authorization right to sell. We have an exclusive agency. We have an open listing. We have a net listing. We got pocket listings, oral listings. We got all these types of listings. You need to know them and what they do. And because this question, they're asking about an exclusive agency. Now, an exclusive agency listing agreement is one that you have to pay out a commission to the agent no matter what, unless you yourself as the owner sells the property. That is the only exception to not paying a decommission to your agent when it comes to an exclusive agency agreement if they've fulfilled all the other terms. So let's see which of them would be the best answer. So an owner must pay a commission to the broker. Okay, yes. No matter who sells the property. No, because there is an exception where the owner themselves can sell the property and not pay a commission. So what they're talking about here is an actual exclusive authorization and right to sell. That's not an exclusive agency listing agreement. So A is not correct. B, an owner can sell the property to anyone the day after the listing expires with no liability to the broker for commission. So this is this could be true for any type of agreement as long as the broker protection clause is not in there. That could be the owner can sell the property to anyone with no liability to the broker for commission. Not necessarily saying which agreement this is, because that's not really exactly the best explanation of an exclusive agency agreement. C, an owner may sell the property himself without liability for a commission to the broker. Yeah, that's what I basically, what we were talking about. The owner can sell the property themselves without liability to pay the commission to the broker under an exclusive agency agreement. That is true. So that looks to be the best answer, but let's make sure about D. An owner can subsequently give another broker a listing at any time, which would have the effect of canceling the original listing agreement. No, that doesn't deal with an exclusive agency. You can't give another broker a listing at any time in an exclusive agency. In an open listing, you can, but that then wouldn't negate, though, the effect of canceling the original listing agreement for an open listing, for instance. But exclusive agency, the best answer is C. An owner may sell the property himself without liability for commission to the broker. That is the best explanation of it. And I do want to clarify also on answer option B. So they're basically saying here that the owner can sell the property to anyone the day after the listing expires. So when a listing expires, the homeowner is then able to go sign a new listing agreement with a different agent. They're able to sell the property themselves on pretty much any type of listing agreement, not necessarily just an exclusive agency, unless there is that broker protection clause that says, hey, these are the people I've showed the property to within my listing during the active listing that I held, and so I'm going to be entitled to a commission if that buyer purchases the property within a set period of time after the expiration of the listing. So, but that's not just for exclusive agency. So let's then go through these listing agreements just to verify so you have an idea of it. But the best answer for this for an exclusive agency is C. So types of listing agreements. So we have quite a few to choose from. We have an open listing agreement. So this one is a one where multiple brokers can work simultaneously to sell the property. But the commission is only paid to the broker who is the procuring cause of the sale. So the one who actually brings the ready, willing, and able buyer, that is the one that is that would be paid a commission, even though there could be multiple brokers working to sell the property. So there can be multiple open listing agreements to multiple agents. Exclusive authorization right to sell. This is the best listing agreement. This is the one that you'll usually be using when practicing because you get paid a commission no matter what who sells the property. So you are entitled to commission no matter who sells the property, within the terms, though, of an active listing agreement of your exclusive authorization and right to sell. And remember, there has to be a definite termination date to that agreement. Now, exclusive agency listing. This is where, what we've been talking about, you get paid a commission no matter who sells the property, except, though, if the seller sells the property him or herself. That is the exception to it. So it's a pretty good, listing agreement, but it's not as good as the exclusive authorization and right to sell. Then we have a net listing. The best way is we just give you an example of it, where the seller says, hey, I want $200,000 for my property. You can keep anything above that. So if the agent sells the property for $225,000, the agent will receive a $25,000 commission. This is legal in California. But the downside is you could do everything correctly and still not receive a commission, because if it sells for below $200,000, you don't get anything. So that's a net listing. Then we have an option listing, where an agent lists a property for sale, and at the same time, the agent personally has an option to purchase the property for a specified purchase price and length of time to exercise the option. So the agent is selling the property, is representing you, but they also have the ability to purchase the property for a specified purchase price that's already been agreed upon, and the length of time then to actually exercise that option. Now, an oral listing, this is the worst one, because an agent relationship is created by oral agreement and is effective in establishing the relationship, but it's really hard to enforce in a court of law. So really not a good one to do. And so you want to have it in writing for a listing agreement. So that is it for this video. I know we covered a lot of topics. I hope it was helpful in your licensing journey. And if you liked it, make sure to check out our website or contact us. We have a lot of exam preparation, as well as the courses to be eligible to take the state exam and be prepared for it. So I have the link below, and also comment if you have questions or what you might have, what else you want us to talk about. We are listening to you, and the more involved you are with our channel, the more we'll keep producing material. But feel free to contact us, and we'd be glad to assist you. My name is Schyler Church. I am with Accredited with the Education Department, as well as a broker. I hope this was helpful, and thanks for watching, and good luck with your licensing journey.